Hello all and welcome to the 6th webinar in our MOOC, Water Addressing the Global Crisis. Today's topic is Transboundary Waters, a source of conflicts or solution. Today's speakers are Dr. Therese Sjömander Magnusson and Dr. Mara Tignino, so I would like to welcome you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy that all of you could join. My name is Therese Sjömander Magnusson. I am the Chief Operations Officer at SIWI, Stockholm International Water Institute, and I'm also the lead faculty for this MOOC. I hope you have enjoyed this chapter on transboundary waters, and I will be very happy to try and respond to your questions. But I've also invited my colleague, Mara Tignino, and I would like her to introduce herself. Mara.
Thank you, Therese. Hello, everyone. Thank you to SDG Academy for inviting me and SIWI. My name is Mara Tignino. I'm a reader at the Faculty of Law at the University of Geneva and coordinator of the Platform for International Water Law at the Geneva Water Hub. So I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mara. And Alexandra will, as always, help out with the questions. Before we start, I'd like to just emphasize that two presentations in this chapter on transboundary waters are case studies, one from the Middle East and one from the Nile River Basin. And even though I have worked in both of these regions previously, as you all know, politics change quickly, and we will probably not be able to respond very detailed questions, but we'll try and do our utmost to respond if you have questions on both these regions. So with that, over to you, Alexandra.
Okay, thank you, Therese. So first question comes from Mohammed, wondering what would be the benefits of the upstream state if they rectify the 1997 UN Convention?
So I would like to share maybe some thoughts about this. I think this is a very relevant question. Of course, it is for states to identify the benefits to join an international instrument from legal perspective and maybe from also a theoretical perspective. If you look at the countries that have ratified the UN Water Courses Convention, there are both upstream and downstream countries. So I think that from there you can see that countries have already found benefits to join the convention, and also if you look at the website of the UNECE Water Convention, so the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Water Courses in International Lakes, there is a specific document that can help states to identify what are the benefits of transboundary water cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara, for that. Moving on to the next question from Mona. Is water law managed or applied by the water diplomacy? And did this kind of diplomacy solve some problems between countries?
Maybe I can start here. Thank you so much, Mona. This is a very relevant topic and something that addresses the methodology approach of water diplomacy, which SIWI is very much engaged in. My point of departure would be, and maybe Mara will reflect more on that as well, is that water law is one of the tools and could be a starting point in some of the discussions formalized through a water diplomacy approach. We have to remember that as SIWI, our take on water diplomacy is really to use a multi-track approach, which means that sometimes it's more relevant to really address the track one decision makers at the highest appropriate level at government to government level, whereby the international water law and the agreements, the formal agreements, can be a very useful tool. And sometimes in a more complex political or a complex resource situation, it can be also more appropriate to use what we call a track 2 approach, where you really work with civil society, academia, private sector, and representatives from authorities and government, where maybe the international water law is one tool of many. And so I think, yes, in some context, that is very much part of the toolbox. Water diplomacy can sustain the dialogue on ratifying or seeing the benefits of international water law in many regions and basins, but it can also be separate from international water law. Mara, would you like to add something there?
I really agree with you that law is one of the tools, so it cannot solve all the water problems, but I think it is indispensable to establish cooperation. So not the only one, but really necessary and indispensable for achieving cooperation between countries.
Yeah. And water diplomacy really has as a starting point to have the right actors in the room to discuss and come together to see what the shared challenges are, but also the shared opportunities are for cooperation. And in some cases, it can be easier to depoliticize an issue and have a starting point for the discussion from somewhere else. For example, environmental issues, flooding and drought situations, etc., and then eventually come to more of a legal structure discussion. So I hope that, Mona, is some response to your very important question.
Thank you both for that. I'm sure that answered her question. Moving on to 2 questions from Linesha. The first question: how can the governance over the transboundary framework be sustained and management with future relay from one governing entity to the other? And how do we go beyond formal commitments and keep entities accountable?
Mara, should I start? You can, because yeah, thank you, Linesha. Very interesting question. Not very easy to answer to, because every river basin has its own context, meaning that the incentive structures for governments to engage in a dialogue are different, and the challenges and opportunities are also different, which means that that influences what kind of governance structure is most suitable and to sustain that. But it also, now the question is lost, but I think I remember it. I would say, I think the question was regarding how to sustain the governance structure. I think we have to look at accountability in incentive structures as a combination of methodologies and approaches to sustain a governance structure. And one very formal part is, of course, the shared responsibilities in the decision-making bodies and the prioritizations. And of course, the regulatory framework of the body, of the river basin organization, on how decisions and priorities are made, and is, of course, very important to sustain that part of the cooperation. But I also believe my experience from different parts of the world, now I'm thinking about cases from Southern Africa, is that by focusing on understanding and visualizing the interdependencies within the basin, that, as well as creating and establishing a shared vision, could be a good mechanism for incentivizing government representatives to stay on as accountable in the governance structure of a river basin. I do also want to add that some of the, I believe, more successful cases of governance structures around transboundary waters are the ones that don't grasp over too many issues from the start. Pick the low-hanging fruit and create a sense of shared responsibility and interest around that. And because it can become more complex the more issues that this governing body is supposed to address. That's my own personal reflection. Mara, would you like to add something here?
No, I think that you have raised already many elements. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, Linisha, I hope that was an answer to your very relevant question. Alexandra?
All right, thank you. So moving on, the next question comes from Camilo, saying the adherence to international water law is voluntary, and a country who has not yet ratified the convention, could they act outside their respective law framework?
So I would like to answer to Camilo. Thank you for the question. No, the adherence to international law is not voluntary; it's binding. So we can look at the sources of international law. There are different sources of international law. So the first one, it is the custom. So the custom rules that are based on the practice of states and on what it is called the opinio juris of states. And then we have the treaties, the agreements, so the second source, so the treaty law. Then we have also the general principles of international, the general principles of law that you can find the sources of international law in the Article 38 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice. And to answer to the first question, the adherence to the international water law is voluntary. No, I answered you already. And when a country has not ratified a convention, for example, the case of the UN Water Courses Convention of 1997 or the UNECE Water Convention, or also other agreements, the reason of what we call the customary law. So the customary law, the customary principle that apply to the states and that the states have to respect. Among these principles, these customary principles, there are the principle of equitable and reasonable use, and you find that this principle has been affirmed by the International Court of Justice in a famous case law, Gacikov-Nagymaros, between Hungary and Slovakia in 1997. And also we have the obligation not to cause a significant harm. Also, this principle has been affirmed in many case laws, starting starting the beginning of the 20th century, the famous case, trail smelter case between the US and Canada. And so these are really not the two key principles of customary law that states have to comply with. And then we have also other principles. So for example, in a case law of the International Court of Justice in 2010, in the pulp mills case between Argentina and Uruguay, the International Court of Justice confirmed the customary nature of the duty to carry out an environmental impact assessment. So this is to show that outside the convention that a state ratified, there is the customary principles that are mandatory for the states. Thank you. I hope that I answered to your question, Camillo.
Thank you, Mara. I think that you answered very eloquently. Next question from Peter. Why are countries not working to streamline their jurisdictional boundaries with the boundaries of the watershed in order to make landscape approach easier?
Wow. Maybe I can just start to reflect, and Mara can, with your legal background, can add your reflections. As a water resources specialist, of course, I agree with you that decision making based on watersheds, or at least an understanding of the watershed, is absolutely key for a prosperous and sustainable future. However, we are working and living in a political context where administrative boundaries are set. That is not to say that I think we can work from other, rather than trying to motivate countries to change these administrative boundaries. I would say that focusing on a systematic approach to cross-sectoral decision-making within and beyond the national boundaries is absolutely key. We also have to bear in mind that, or at least one reflection is that some countries of the world, I was meeting a person from Bangladesh yesterday here in Stockholm, and he informed me that Bangladesh has more than, I think it was 77 shared river basins with other countries. So just imagine, and coming back to your question, imagine the administrative costs and efforts to try to align these discussions. It's an incredible work. It's very time consuming, and so yes, in essence it would be better, but I don't think it's so realistic yet. Mara?
Yes, from the legal point of view, the boundary, it is the way how the states are built and separated between them. I think that it is interesting the interpretation that the International Court of Justice gives about this boundary delimitations when it refers to water resources, in particular shared water resources. It is that the boundaries in this case should be considered as an area of cooperation between countries, so that they are not fixed boundary that separate people, but on the contrary, that bring together people, because we know that in the case of a transboundary water resource, a shared water resource, it does not know boundaries, so it's flowing between countries, and also in the case of local population, local communities, especially in Africa, for example, they cross countries, so something that it is imposed, we can say, by humans with the boundaries cannot put barriers to natural elements like water, or also the movement of local communities. Thank you for this interesting question, Peter.
Yeah, very.
Okay, very challenging questions. We have very engaged students in this MOOC, which is great.
I'm very happy about that. Yes.
So moving on, next question comes from Jim. Is the World Meteorological Organization using its hydrometeorological prediction system to support transboundary water management decisions for members at all time scales? And should this be a priority?
Mara, should I start?
Yes.
Yes, the WMO has a unique mandate, but also possibility with their hydrometric system. I can't say with certainty how correct the data is all across the globe. I think they are, as I said, in a unique position to provide that. But there are challenges always with the technology and operation and maintenance, etc. But leaving that aside, yes, the WMO are using their systems, and I know from my own experience working with Transboundary Cooperation that they are an important actor, but also we have to remember that countries usually have, not all countries, but many have their own meteorological data systems and collections. And this in general is something that I think should be of higher priority. In order for governments or river basin organizations of any kind, up-to-date and correct data is very important to take informed decisions. However, just a reflection, data can also be a source of not conflict, but disagreement of the reliability, correctness, etc. And that's also where I believe a UN organization like WMO has a very important role to play in providing more objective data through their hydrometeorological stations. Mara, would you like to add something?
No, I think that yes, no, I absolutely agree about the importance of that sound decisions must be based on sound data, and the World Meteorological Organization plays an important role. And there are also, of course, as you said, the states that they have their own data. So I think that in general we need more data. Not this is for sure something that comes up in the discussion regularly. And especially, I was thinking about the management of groundwater resources, aquifers.
Absolutely.
There, the importance of data is even more important and difficult, to have about all. And so that we can have a good management of this resource.
Absolutely. And just to add to this important point that Mara is raising, in order to make the most useful and efficient use of improved data sets, the approach of water diplomacy can enable the discussion. So it's very important to have a basis of where the parties are talking to each other before more and more data is introduced. So having different approaches to finding ways of collaborating is important, and of which one is very important is correct data sets. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're ready for a next question, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so next question comes from Varun. What is the penalty if a country, after signing an agreement and then doesn't obey it? How can the UN intervene in that?
So maybe of course this is a larger question that the module on transboundary water resources. So it is really not a question of general international law. I think that it is not really the place where to do a course of international law. So I would suggest that for this kind of things, it is very important to look at the manual of international law and what can be done. So if I answer partially to this question, saying that there is the possibility to bring a dispute before the International Court of Justice. There are also arbitration tribunals, or also other type of mechanism. For example, with the UNECE Water Convention, so the convention that I just mentioned, there is a mechanism called the implementation mechanism that can help countries to comply with the obligations of the convention, and also to support. So it is really in a positive way, not to give assistance to the countries, because it is true that it can be challenging to comply with the different provisions that are contained in international instruments. So I hope that this answer partially to the question. Thank you.
Okay, no comments from Therese, yeah?
No,
Okay.
not at this point. No.
All right, moving on to the next one. Comes from Serge. Ukraine started building 6 water power stations in the upstream of Dniester River, a transboundary flow between Moldova and Ukraine. The construction is carried out despite Moldova's disapproval. To what extent could water diplomacy help here?
Mara, should I reflect first? Thank you, Serge. I do not know about this river in particular, but building on what you're explaining and reflecting back on the process of water diplomacy in essence is about establishing trust. As well as understanding the benefits of cooperation for other riparian countries apart from yourself, but it's also about understanding the reality of making trade-offs. It is about having an open discussion about shared benefits. What we see generally in many parts of the world is that investments in water-related infrastructure, for example, hydropower and dams, is a reality. It is unfortunate if downstream countries have not been consulted, and Mara can elaborate more on pre-notification, etc. processes in the legal framework. But speaking from my own experience, I would say that water diplomacy can, on a multi-track approach, which means not only between government and government, which can be potentially, I'm not sure in your specific case, in a bit of a locked situation. I would probably suggest to work from track 2 and track 3, which is more focusing on civil society, academia, and other actors, and to open up an atmosphere of dialogue and move from there, and really focusing on the benefits, but also the potential to reduce environmental impact, for example, to start developing a shared analysis about the consequences of certain decision makings in the basin, developing scenarios together. Of course, this doesn't happen overnight, and I think that what we have seen in many parts of the world is where there is an inclusive process where many different actors are engaged and have a voice that usually brings in more aspects and bring the cooperation to a next level. So I think water diplomacy have to start in this case, in similar cases, by a track 2 and track 3 approach. Yes. Mara, would you like to reflect on the pre-notification aspects of
Yes, thank you. Yes, no, I would like to start saying that in international water law, we usually do this distinction between substantive norms and procedural norms. So substantive norms are usually referred for the principle of equitable and reasonable use, or the obligation not to cause significant harm. And in the procedural, among the procedural norms, there is the consultation process. So what the first element, it is the notification. So what is the notification? It is when there is the plan of a project, a state should notify the relevant documentation to a country that can be affected by the project. And of course, two key elements there are the fact that this notification of the relevant documentation is given prior to the beginning of the project. So if more preliminary is this notification, more easily the damage can be prevented, and also the discussion between countries can take place, and also the importance to include in this in the documentation that is transmitted, it is the environmental impact assessment. And here again, I've already mentioned the pulp mills case between Argentina and Uruguay, and the issue of notification, of prior notification, was at the heart of the dispute. And in the part of the notification, it is the transmission of the environmental impact assessment. So in legal terms, we talk about the notification, and then the consultation between the parties. So the parties, the states, discuss about these documents, and also there is, for example, the UN Water Courses Convention establish a very specific procedure about the notification, giving also the deadline for the reply of a country receiving documentation, so it is like a triggering mechanism for the consultation between the country. And then after, so the consultation, we have also the negotiation, because in the legal in the legal area we love to have different words. So the first phase, it is the consultation, then the negotiation. The negotiation it can be considered already as a way of prevention of a dispute. So it can be also to be the first signal that no, we need to pay attention to this particular project that can trigger a more complex situation, relationship between the countries. So many thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mara. Maybe I could add something to this, and what we as CIWI has been noticing is the role of media in enabling cooperation, but sometimes also making it more challenging to start creating a trustful environment between countries. So one thing that we have experienced is that capacitating and informing media representatives from all parts of the basin and different countries enables the public opinion to be informed in a different way. And that can be also a tool of water diplomacy that can be useful together with the law instruments, etc., that Mara was referring to. I just wanted to add that because I think that's important, maybe in your case.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And also in legal terms, we have now what we call the public participation. So during the environmental impact assessment phase, now we know
exactly.
so the media can help are very important to have this phase conducted in a proper way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. That was very, very interesting to listen to. Moving on to the next question from Yekta. This is a question related to the course video. So Mara mentioned about UNDC during her lecture. Could she give some more information about the organization? I thought it might be a typing mistake because I couldn't find any information. So maybe if you could just quickly answer that, Mara, please.
Yes, I think that it is referring to UNECE, so the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, it is one of the 5 regional organizations of the United Nations. So we have UNECE was established in 48, and what it is interesting in this organization, it is that it has 53 parties, and it includes even if we think about it is Economic Commission for Europe, it includes also the US, Canada, the states of Central Asia, Russia, and Israel. So as you can see, now there is a very very many different states that are parties to this organization. Of course, no, it must be distinguished with the European Union, so it is a different thing. The United Nations Economic Commission for Europe is different from the European Union, and also something that it is important. It is that the fact to be part of this organization, it does not imply that you are a party of the convention, for example, the water convention of 1992. So it is the fact to be a member of this international organization. Then there is another process for the ratification of the conventions, and the water convention, it is one of the convention that has been negotiated under this umbrella that it is the UNECE. So for example, another important instrument that was negotiated under the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, it is what we call the ESPO Convention, so the Convention on the Transboundary Environmental Impact Assessment, and also the ARUS Convention, so the Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation, and access to justice. I'm sorry, the titles are not exactly what I'm saying because they are quite long titles. So I'm summarizing the title. But if you can find that is information in the website of the organization of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Moving on then, thank you, Mara. Moving on then, a question from Salma. Yesterday in Jordan, there was a heavy rain which led to King Talal Dam to be filled with water for the first time in 40 years. What is the sustainable behavior that should be taken in this case?
Wow. Should I start, Mara?
Yes.
Thank you, Salma. First of all, for this amazing information. I didn't know about it. I've been fortunate to be able to visit Jordan a couple of times. So I'm quite familiar with the climatic context, but also the influx of migrants to Jordan and what that how that impact the country. First of all, of course, it is fantastic that the dam is filled, but exactly what you're pointing out is important. now is the time to take wise decisions on how to govern and use this water, because in this region you don't know when that dam will be filled again. And I would say that in the case of Jordan or dry to semi-dry regions with high variability and unpredictability in rainfall, but also in a region which has is partly and in a conflict phase. I think it's important to be open with the fact that you have to balance the urgent needs when it comes to just bringing water to people. So the human water security basically has to be addressed, but it also needs to balance the long-term use or the very careful use of water for an extended period of time. I know, for example, that in more and more across the world, when a dam is filled with surface water, as in this case, there is technology that enables countries to pump the surface water into the ground to store it as groundwater, if possible, in the bedrock. I think Jordan is probably already doing it, but taking these decisions on a very transparent and maximizing the benefits over time is crucial, and it will put a lot of pressure on decision makers because the needs are greater than the surface water available in the dam itself. We know that. So balancing human needs, urgent emergency needs, with the long-term kind of water investments is difficult. But this also necessitates, coming back to the water diplomacy approach, that actors are able to participate and be included in that dialogue on how these decisions are being made, because it will impact all sectors, all human beings, especially in a very dry region. So inclusive and participatory processes are key. And sometimes there will be trade-offs that has to be taken in order to provide more secure water for the coming years. Yeah, challenging way ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mara, would you like to add?
No, absolutely. I think that it is very difficult and challenging, yes, this balance between urgent needs and long-term needs. But no, it is very important to be able to do that, and maybe what we said also before about the participation also of the people, so that also this can help to see what are the priorities and to have these two dimension, long term and short term. So in the legal terms, we say that we should take into account the needs of the present and future generations.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Thank you both so much. Moving on to the next question from Simon. Are international transboundary waters generally more contentious than international ones? If so, why, and how can this be improved?
I can start, Mara, and you can add your with your legal lens. I would say that the international ones are a bit more contentious, than the intranational. However, and that very much refers to that there is another complexity when shared waters is being negotiated between countries with different political structures and regulations and laws, etc. It should be easier on an international level. But what we see across the world is that with climate change and the more recurrent extreme weather events, intranational transboundary waters will probably, in many parts of the world, become more contentious than previously. The discussions and disputes within a country, upstream, downstream, between different sectors are going to increase simply because each country will more and more be affected from climate change. That's my immediate reflection to your question. Very interesting, though. I think we probably will see more discussion, more research on intranational transboundary waters in the future, in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I would say that at the national level we can have what we call as a intersectoral conflict. So conflict between different sectors, and we can think about, for example, mining activities. So the impact of some economic activities on the rights of the local communities or their environment. So this can probably in the future, but already now there are many cases of conflicts at the national level, and of course now we we tend to focus more on the conflicts at the transboundary level, but we should keep also an eye on the conflict at the intersectoral level. And there, for example, there are many issues of human rights that are raised.
Absolutely. Very important.
Okay, and next question from Manuel. He wondering if there are any examples of conflict solutions.
I wonder if Manuel is asking for a dispute that has been resolved. Mara, should we give a few examples of such conflict? Or is it more on a process level? Maybe can I start to reflect on the processes? Since those are the ones that I have been more engaged with. I would say that my immediate reflections on examples which have provided a platform to minimize the risk of conflict and the dispute and disagreements, because not all situation ends up in a strict conflict situation, and very, very few, fortunately, in an armed conflict. But there are often disagreements. So if we keep that as a starting point, I would say that neutral third-party involvement has proven to be very important. A facilitator from outside the basin is important to try and establish a trustful dialogue. Personally, I've seen that when one country steps forward and has more of an, how should I put it, where the representative of a government, for example, is more able to be an ambassador for the good of the whole basin and driving the dialogue between the countries, being one of the parties, has been very helpful. And also being able to identify their own trade-offs that they are able to do, that really has been opening some doors for further dialogue. I think one other important issue is probably this process of transboundary cooperation is a long-term process usually. It is something that we should try and support countries and parties to engage on a longer time. You can do step and step, but you also have to count on the fact that sometimes you take one step back in terms of the collaboration. I spoke about trust building, and trust building is about creating relationships. I was part of supporting a basin in Southern Africa for many years, and the informal, providing the possibilities for informal discussions between representatives from different countries provided a unique opportunity where they don't have to position their views, but they can really just share a telephone number, very, very simple, so that they have an open dialogue when they leave the meeting. What else? I mean, I firmly believe, and what SIWI has seen as well, finally, is the role of women. I actually think that we should elevate more the leaders, the water managers, the female water managers, to see how they approach the issue of water cooperation. And this is something that SIWI is engaged with, and providing, capacitating female leaders in terms of water diplomacy. So I think that could be part of a methodology and really a focus in the years to come. So by that, I hand over to Mara, but that was just a few examples of my own experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think the case that I have already mentioned that were brought before the International Court of Justice, so the Gapchikovo-Najmaros case or the Palm Mills case between Argentina and Uruguay. So these are example of a conflict where the parties agreed not to go before an international court to solve this conflict. So I share absolutely the idea with Therese about the importance of also the neutral third party facilitator, that can facilitate the discussion, the mediation. For example, now we have seen this with the role of the World Bank for the mediation in the Indus basin between India and Pakistan, where there was no the mediation of the bank for the conclusion of the Indus treaty. So no, there are different techniques that can be used to solve a conflict. More formal techniques like through a judicial mean, or through an informal mechanism like the mediation or facilitation of a third party.
Thank you both so much. I think we're running out of time, so we can just take one final question. And that comes from Mohammed. What would be the effects of non-water factors on transboundary cooperation among shared river basin states?
Very, very good and very important question, Mohammed. Thank you. I strongly believe that the outside the water sector, the water box, those factors are absolutely key to establish a platform for cooperation long term. Sometimes you can talk about regional integration, the broader concept of regional integration within a river basin, where you extend the pie of benefits between states. I'm thinking about agriculture production. One country may not have the same preconditions to produce certain products. Thereby, you can start collaborating more from that end, and through increased trade, that can also enhance cooperation. So if you invest in irrigation in one part and you increase the trade, you can share the benefits through regional integration. Transport is another, navigational transport or land transport. So I think there is, this is a very important point you raise here, Mohammed. Sometimes I believe that that we, working within the water space, too much look at the water resource as such, but to incentivize decision makers to join a platform, a governance structure, you really need to look beyond water and the non-water factors to increase the potential for collaboration. Mara, would you like to add something there?
No, thank you.
Okay.
All right, I think we need to wrap up. I want Therese, Mara, do you have any final words you would like to say?
Thanks. I think this is amazing. First of all, I really sincerely hope that you have found the course, the whole MOOC so far, very interesting, and that your inspiration for engaging in water has increased. I see you as our target group as the next generation of water leaders, whoever you are. You have an important role to play wherever you will be in society. So I'm very happy about being able to also reflect on your questions, because you come from different parts of the world, different experiences, backgrounds, and it's so important and such an opportunity for me to be able to engage with you here today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, for the same here. It was the question were challenging. But it was really a good exercise to think together also about how not to address these questions, and I really hope that you will continue to take the issue of water in your country and also abroad, and encourage the role also of women leaders.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I would like to thank all our viewers for tuning in for this webinar. I hope that all your burning questions have been answered. I would also like to gently remind you that we don't have time to answer all questions. That is a fact of life. We only have 1 hour and many interesting questions. Also, some questions are not relevant to this week's webinar topic, so please keep your questions short and related to the topics within the module that we're covering, because our speakers are experts within their specific aspect of water. I would like to thank Dr. Therese Sjömander Magnusson and Dr. Mara Tignino for taking the time out of their very busy schedules to answer all your questions today. So thank you both. And I would like to remind you that our next webinar is at 10 a.m. UTC on Tuesday, 5th March with Professor Jan Lundqvist. So it's 2 hours earlier than this one today. And yeah, have a lovely Friday, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.